Hello, Dylan.
Hello, Jane.
Thank you for being here to talk to me today about the death of your father in
Mm,
January, the time surrounding it.
yes. Well, thank you for being there, and thank you for bringing this up as an idea because I feel like this kind of thing is really useful for people to contemplate, and there's no avenues in culture that usually contemplate these things. It's kind of put to the side. People don't like talking about it or thinking about it, so that's just what we're gonna do.
We're gonna go straight for it.
We're just
And
gonna dive right in.
yeah, yeah, I think there's a lot that makes me want to do this podcast with you. Like you said, I was there, I was acting as doula for you and your dad.
Mm,
Um, a lot of that time in the days leading up and just after, it was just the three of us there.
yeah.
Um, and I think that talking about it, like you say, will be really helpful for others to hear on various levels. And I think there was so much that was really special and beautiful about how you and your dad approached that and what I was able to offer by being there. And I think also that it was such a monumental event that going back through the details day by day, I think will offer a kind of reprocessing experience
Mm,
for both of
wow.
us, for you especially, I think, but for both of us.
Yeah. 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 I hadn't thought of that. It's a good point. Yeah, because I've thought about it here and there at different points and have written a little bit about it. Um, but to go like kind of point by point revisit it will be, I'm coming into this conversation with some kind of idea of what I feel I want to get across. But that's always how it goes. And then there might be some new kind of branches that sprout from those original points. So I don't know what'll happen. I know, but I also don't know, which is kind of like the territory of death. You just never know what's going
Yes.
to happen.
Yes, I'm feeling that vibe here with us already.
Yeah.
Uh, how about to start us off? I would love it if you would speak your father's name into the space.
Yeah. Phil. Philip Giles was my father's name, but Phil was what he went by. And when he died, he was 79 years old. And he had been suffering from prostate cancer for about 12 years up to that point. When he got his original diagnosis, they told him he had 8 months to live. The radiologist said he better get his affairs in order. But my dad thought the radiologist was out to get him because my dad was a Marine and the radiologist might have been an Army man or something. They had bad blood for some reason. But regardless, he had this original feeling of 8 months to live. And he didn't actually tell me that at the time. He didn't tell me that till much later. And he ended up living another 12 years. And 12 years of seeing me graduate college, or graduate high school, go to college, graduate college, get my first job, have my first partner, all of these milestones that he could be present for that my mother wasn't present for because she died in 2015 before I graduated high school. So I really, even even now, even I think the days following his death, I felt really lucky that he had lived as long as he had because he we had that original feeling that we wouldn't even have one more year, and then he had 12 more. So there's a lot of emotion surrounding it, but one of the main ones is gratitude. Like he lived that long when it wasn't even clear that would be the case, and he got so much more out of life than we all originally thought.
And for all of those 12 years, was there a point when the doctor said something like, "Oh, it looks like you might live a while longer," or was it always kind of touch and go that whole time?
Um, as far as the doctors, I think there were plenty of points from that original diagnosis to maybe the last 2 years where there was a long period of like, with prostate cancer, remission's kind of a tricky word because it could kind of surge in an instant again, but where it was effectively in a remission. So he was on a hormone therapy that um, lowered the rate at which it lowered his testosterone, like, and that's what allows the cancer to grow in prostate cancer is the presence of testosterone. So he was basically it's called the chemical castration. So he had no testosterone for most of those years until eventually, in the last year or two, that medication he was on stopped working as well. And then we did this kind of touch and go of switching to different medications. And then ultimately, those didn't work either. Um, he had a long period where what the doctors were communicating was essentially remission. But I think as far as his own experience of it, I remember him telling me he always felt that it was hanging over his head. He always felt the stress and anxiety and fear surrounding it. I think even in that period of his life, because the doctor's visits didn't stop, and he had to get, depending on the time period, either um, monthly hormone injections or six months and shots, and they needed to take his blood to see how everything was going. So even though he was in this remission, the routine of medical checks didn't end. And he felt, I think, the weight of that the whole time, even though the signals from the doctors were like, well, you're all good now, for now.
Okay. It feels
Yeah.
relevant to mention also that you were doing a lot of caregiving over those years.
Yeah. Um, the first few years I was in college, and he was in really good health, um, despite all this. When I came back from college, I saw he had aged a lot. And my father, for most of my life, was a really like robust, strong, like almost like bull of a man. And he got his kicks from like exercising his body basically into exhaustion. But he loved like being on a rowing machine, and he would tell me stories of at the gym of people sitting down next to him and rowing, and he'd be rowing. They'd get off, then someone else would get on. He'd still be rowing, and just this like line of people doing these rowing sprints. And he was more of this kind of marathon rower. He'd do hundreds of push-ups a day. He'd take me to the gym and work out with me, and then do other workouts. And he was this really robust, strong, like fiery man. And when I came back from college, that fire had really dimmed a lot, and I realized that I couldn't leave again. I realized this was in 2020. I thought I need to stay with him. I felt the fear, especially after my mom had died. I felt a lot of fear around his health from me. I felt really afraid. And I decided I needed to stay. And at that point, he needed a lot of financial help too. Um, we as soon as I got home, we had sold the house. He couldn't keep up with mortgage payments anymore, and it was going to be foreclosed in a few months. And from then on, we were more or less inseparable. I lived with him for most of the last 5 years, with some changes at the end, but I handled as best I could, being a young 20 something, the finances, and found a job to bring in money. And um, I was many things to him at different points. Um, I guess just he was my best friend for a long time. And I think at points, other people who've cared for a parent will realize this. You have a role reversal where the roles aren't so clearly defined, and maybe sometimes you're the parent. And I felt that transition right out of college, which was really disorientating, just in some ways and not all of them. Um, but for example, being the one bringing in money, he had a social security check, but it wasn't enough for the both of us. So I had to make money and manage the finances. And when he wasn't well, I had to kind of care for him. The physical part came later in the last year or two, 2023 and 2024, and then January this year. Um, but a lot of it also was just the the toll of spending time with what happens to our elderly in the States is just appalling. You know, they end up living alone, or they end up being kind of shipped off into like facilities that are away from their loved ones, and their loved ones don't visit them. And just this whole cultural thing about what it means to grow old, what it means to be old. We don't have this idea of elder. We don't have this idea of like wisdom transmission from an elder to the community. What we have is like, well, you're old, okay, throw you in the trash. You know, you're not a productive, functioning member of our capitalist society anymore. And not only that, you're kind of gross looking because we value youth and beauty. The beauty of youth over the beauty of aging, the beauty of wisdom, the beauty of like having weathered the storms of life. And so what that meant was that he often was alone, and I was kind of, not all the time, but for lots of those periods, his only source of support, also like emotional. And so it was all these different roles, from sometimes being the parent, sometimes being his best friend, his emotional support, his financial kind of help, and all these different things that at the time I couldn't put to words. I just knew that I was doing a lot and it was overwhelming. And that went on until his death. And it just, I had to wear, what did they say? I had to wear many hats. Yeah.
Yeah, I was really struck by this in various ways. I mean, I met you, I think, roughly 3 years before he died.
Yeah.
And
Like 2022.
yeah, it was always such a big part of you and your life was like um, this kind of shared blessing and burden of this closeness with your dad that also involved so much responsibility. And you are still in your 20s. Like you lost both of your parents before age 30.
Yeah.
And on top of that, like spent so much of your 20s like giving so much of yourself um to
Yeah.
him and his yeah, yeah, it's just feels so notable because it was like a kind of I've known you as this people listening I think will have heard it already from the things you've said in these few minutes. You have this like really beautiful poetic mystic quality to you. You feel really like wise and mature beyond your years, and I think this is a part of that.
Yeah. I think it's a strange thing to be speaking out of, to be speaking from that position, because it almost feels like how in a video game, in some of those video games, you can like put all your points in like one skill of something. Like you can have like 20 in charisma and 0 in strength or something like that. I feel like these experiences that I've had, like, kind of matured me in a lot of ways, like well beyond what people my age go through. Like I just have to admit that. And then at the same time, it had this reverse effect where I actually found it really hard to bond with people my age because I spent so much time at my work. My manager was in her 60s, and with my father in his 70s, I actually spent so much time around mature older people that I actually felt this disorientation when I was around people my age of like, I don't actually know how to bond with people. So it's like I had this I did have this growth and this quality of maturity, but it was actually difficult to even bring myself back to people my age, and just kind of, the only thing I can think of is like be normal, but that's not really what I mean. But be ordinary maybe, or just be with people my age um, without needing them to understand, which was another very difficult part of this journey that I went through, was the loneliness and the isolation of like no one. that knew me up to that point in my life. Even by the time my mother had died, almost no one could relate because most of my friends still had a parent. And then by the time I was caring for him and doing all this, it was like I felt like an alien. You know, I felt like no one could even begin to understand what I had gone through. And now, especially that he's died, I don't know what I am. I don't know what I am. Um, I don't. I don't know. It's such a complex collection of emotions because on the one hand, I know my like I would be a very different person if it had not happened, and I feel grateful. I really love who I am. I'm grateful for the person I am. Um, on the other hand, my dad would always say, and you brought it up, and you're talking about the blessing and the burden, and he would say every blessing has its burden, and I would turn that around and say that every burden has its blessing, and so it ended up being this really burdensome several years of my life, which were the hardest of my life. I really struggled with my mental health. I struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts and constant anxiety and fear. And at the same time, I also feel that the burden of going through that did have a lot of blessings because I feel I appreciate things that I could not have appreciated before. It's like that line from the Joni Mitchell song. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you got till it's gone? And living without a lot of those things that I took for granted really, by the time now that it's over and I'm in this new place in New Zealand and with friends and just kind of living an ordinary like 20 something life, it's like a relief. I'm like, oh wow, like this is amazing. And what is amazing is just ordinary life. You know, it's not anything spectacular, not anything crazy. I'm not out here making millions of dollars or going to parties or anything like that. But I just feel so lucky after having gone through that that now I can live my life on my terms.
Yeah, it's got a very Benjamin Button quality.
Yeah, yeah, reverse Benjamin Button, where I get less responsibility as I get older.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Um, I think let's move towards the death, and I think that
yeah,
all of this will come back around throughout the conversation because your really unique relationship with your dad, I think, is is so woven into the whole death experience. I
mm-hmm.
mean, really, the fact that it was you caring for him at the end, you know, like it was, of course it was, you know what I mean? Like it
Mm-hmm.
was, you were, there was so much on your shoulders that week,
Yeah,
as there had been for years leading up. So this podcast is called Home Funeral Stories. I invite people on to tell the story of a home funeral that they hosted or attended. And this case is a little bit different because technically your dad didn't have a funeral. Um,
yeah,
but I think that what we did to me like was very special and kind of qualified as its own, almost like a little tiny private home funeral for him.
yeah.
Um,
I think so.
yeah, so I want to like really get into the details of that and like what each day was like and how we
Yeah,
approached it and why.
yeah, sure, sure. Well, it was touch and go at the beginning, wasn't it? Because we weren't sure how many days he had left. To give a little context, he had been on hospice for, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks at that point. And the first the first day or two, I just asked you if you could come up just to meet him, and we could kind of assess the situation and just see what was going on. But at that point, we didn't think he was going to die that quickly. And you came up, and when we had met him, I had been really caring for him intensively at that point for well, more than that, maybe a month or a month and a half. hospice nurses. He was at home in his apartment for hospice, which was a blessing. Nurses were coming every so often for just 5 minutes, check on him, take his vitals. Other than that, everything was kind of on me. And um, I remember you met him, and I remember the next day you and I, we went on a hike, and a friend of his had come to visit and stay with him while you and I were on this hike. And then it was still touch and go. It seemed at that point, from I remember from your point of view, it was like, well, it doesn't seem that he's going to die immediately. And this question was like, should you go home? Should you go back? Because what you were really here for was to provide the services at his death and afterwards. We weren't really sure. But then it kind of changed. You were still around, and it changed quite quickly. He reached this point where he was ready, and he said so much to me. And I just provided a tiny little bit of morphine to him, which is its own kind of branch story, but just to sum up the series of events. And then that day, it progressed really quickly at that point, January 18th. And you had come to visit. I remember you had written a note to me. We were speaking kind of either quietly or we were just writing to each other. And you said to me, you said, it looks like he's closer to the light. It looks to me that he's closer to the light than he's been. Um, and I remember watching him and feeling this peace coming from his body. He was completely relaxed. The most relaxed I had ever seen him, even including sleep. His breath had changed. Um, he was still responsive to me and my voice, but not saying much anymore, not talking. And he had relaxed to the point where, like, when you see a 3-month-old baby sleeping, that level of relaxation. Like the other day, I watched someone with a baby carrier on their chest, and the baby was like slumped, and I just found it hilarious, like how limp that baby was. I just it kind of felt like that looking at him, that same level of peace and relaxation in his body.
Can we back up a little
And
bit?
then
I wanna
yeah,
just make
do you want
sure
to do
that
it day by day?
yeah, if you're okay with that, I think that
Yeah,
I think it would be really nice to go through the timeline like very slowly. Um,
sure.
Something that was notable to me, so yeah, Saturday was the day he ended up dying. Thursday
Mm,
before that, we went for that hike. And I have the sense that that was probably your first like significant kind of break from the deathbed. Like you were really
yeah,
sitting and staying with him, maybe running a very quick errand here and there.
yeah,
But like really staying by his side. And I think his friend coming to stay with him so that you could get out for a couple of hours for a hike seemed like it did a lot for you.
yeah, it did. I needed to move in for hospice. He couldn't be alone. So I had been sleeping. He was in the living room in a hospital bed once they started hospice, and I'd been sleeping there for 3 weeks in his bed, waking up in his house with all his items and with the cats, and only going 5 minute drive to the store to get stuff and coming back, and maybe a walk here and there. Um, I had no visitors besides once my brother, my half brother, his son, his other son, who came for one afternoon. I had no other visitors besides the hospice staff. I talked to people on the phone, but I was on my own in it. And you're right, the whole time. And that hike that we took was a very significant break for me, a very like um, chance, a very important chance to relax and just enjoy things again. Because I had been so in this working mode, so surrounded by the deathbed and by his um, decline that I felt constantly overwhelmed and stressed and quite depressed. Um, I could see he was not emotionally doing very well, and that was painful for me. And so for us to take that break was really good for me. We went on this, it was like all day, more or less, maybe 4 or 5 hours. And we went on this hike and just walked and enjoyed the scenery and looked at the river that was there and spent a lot of time just kind of at a relaxed pace. And that was really good for me to clear my head and relax and then just um, I don't know, like a breather, like a shower, you know, when you kind of have a big day and you take a shower and you don't feel dirty, but you just wash something off anyway and you come back refreshed. Kind of your energy's cleansed. That's what that felt like, an energy palate cleanser.
Yeah, totally. And there was something that we started doing on the way back from the hike, driving back
Yeah,
to your dad's place, that I hope it's
yeah,
okay if I talk about this. I got to see
yeah.
a totally new to me side of Dylan. Like, so as I was referencing earlier, like you, I have known in the years I've known you to be this like very sort of like grandfatherly wise poet, mystic, mellow, like
Yeah,
very like calm, like a river of like poetry and heart and love and all of this. And then
yeah.
I find out that Dylan is a former theater kid who who loves improv and was
Yeah.
and like you can sing, you're like a musical theater kid. And
Yeah.
so we start like playing around with improv, and I'm not just bringing this up because it was fun or something. Like this
Mm,
feels to me actually like it really tied in that week in an interesting way.
mm,
Um,
mm.
yeah, I think like part of what was really magical and sacred about that week was that there was, for me, for myself and then also witnessing you guys, there was like a real fullness to the experience. Another reason
Yeah.
why I wanted to have you on the podcast is because like I was so moved watching the way that you approached everything that week. Like you were so death is so hard and you were so um up for every corner of it. Like you were so
Mm,
present and you were so like given over to what was happening and like you were not you up for it sounds positive or something, but like what I saw you doing was just continuously showing up for like whatever was there, which was sometimes really hard, sometimes really, really beautiful and moving and sacred and
mm.
like. And then there was also this piece that I felt this week, which was like getting to connect with you on the theater side and like getting to do improv with you and mess around with like kind of imaginal qualities that were present. Like when we were
Mm.
doing some improv in the car coming back from the hike, we were kind of playing around with like some characters and stuff. But for me, there was like a real it was kind of like the death was there with us already and it was weaving through the improv that we were doing. It felt to
Mm.
me like we were kind of just loosening up our psyches and like
Yeah.
giving life a little bit of a door to like send us some messages about the death that was imminent and like preparing us for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for that because what came from that was something very beautiful actually when I think about it. It's um we we assume these different characters. I think I, it's hard to even like describe it in retrospect because without the context it just sounds a bit like what like what was that, but there was this element and this swap we did. I think if I remember right, both of us were at different points we assumed the role of kind of the wisdom holder in um this this role play, and we both kind of swapped. And I remember the clearest message I remember was to like really appreciate the sunset. And for me, this I always love this poetic use of language, and sunset to me was the death. was to really even kind of savor it in this strange way, was to really be in it, to really look at it, to be there like fully, and to not look away from it, and to embrace it. And I just remember this feeling of like an urgency that came over me after that conversation. And then that I came home, and I think you made this suggestion to, it was this imaginal um, suggestion that had room for interpretation, but it was basically to kind of capture the moment, to kind of appreciate the moment. And we took this picture with my friend who was caring for him. She took a picture of me and him, and it's an incredibly beautiful picture. Um, when I look at it, I feel, when I look at it, I see on my face the love I have for him. But when I look at him, I see such tenderness and vulnerability and openness in his face. And I really feel like that was one of the blessings that came from that year, was that over the years he had really softened and took on this vulnerable, open, like completely vulnerable quality to him that blew me away. I felt like I was watching something bloom open. And it reminded me at the time of like cherry blossoms, how in the springtime where we were living, cherry blossoms would blossom, would bloom all down the street on these specific trees, and they bloom for just a moment and then they'd fall off the branch. And I felt like there were times with him that last year as he was sick that he would bloom in this completely beautiful way that I had never seen. And I think that picture captured that same kind of blossoming, that same vulnerability and softness that was in him at that point. And that to me was just one example of what I would have missed out if I had not given myself over to the situation completely. And I think that was what had arisen from our, one thing at least that had arisen from our improv and dialogue, which is that, and I think what it is that we take on the role of our identity so seriously that the things that are a little looser are really hard to take on. So by doing this improv, we kind of loosened how we normally act and are and express in the world, and allowed these other, you could say, energies to enter into the conversation, um, which allow kind of the surface level persona or role to kind of crumble a bit, to get a little more loose, so other things could seep through the cracks. And what seeped through the crack was this kind of like urgent, even not anger, but forcefulness. I remember feeling that. Like at the time, I kind of thought it was anger, but I just feel now looking back, it was just this strength, like this like urgent power that was saying that it was extremely important that I'm with the whole situation and capture it. And I think that picture was what was the gift that emerged from that improv on the car ride. And I remember even showing you that picture, and we both got this sense of like, well, okay, good. You said something like, glad to see you capturing that sunset, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and the sunset thing, like we must have been driving west because we were driving home, driving back to his place from the hike, and we were driving into this like gorgeous, massive sunset in front of us. Like that was the thing
Wow.
with the improv, is that like it was like
Right.
we were being really present and open, and like our immediate surroundings like were offering us something through that
Yeah.
openness and flexibility of character and presence.
Yeah.
That was another thing that was so fun about seeing that side of you, is like um your already normally high presence was just like that much more intensified. Like I have never seen you really like came alive in those bits and characters that we were doing, and it was so fun and alive, and like the your
Yeah.
presence level was so intensely high. I am looking at that
Yeah.
picture now as you talk about it. I love that picture. Um Yes, I remember that coming through in the improv as well. And I'll put this in the I'll put the picture in the video if it's okay with you after.
Yeah,
Um, what
yeah,
was the other
totally.
thing I wanted to say about that? I don't know. I lost it.
It's all right. It'll come back around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the softness that you're talking about with him. I had the really fascinating experience. So that hike that we took was Thursday. I met your dad the day before Wednesday for the first time. I had heard so much about him from you over the years that I had known you, like I felt connected to your and your dad's story in some meaningful way, but I had never met him until that Wednesday. And I didn't even know if I was going to come to town, knowing that it was very possible that he wouldn't want any new people around and I might not even meet him. Maybe I would just run errands and stay off to the side and that kind of thing. So it felt really special to get to come into his home, be welcomed in, and get to meet him. And had a small window there where he was still verbal, and I got to talk to him a little bit. And I felt like he said something so beautiful to me. At one point, you and I were talking, and he just like piped up kind of suddenly, and he said,
Mm.
"Jane." And we kind of paused and he said, I think we no, first he said, I'm sorry we're meeting like this.
Yeah.
And then he said, I think we could have been good friends.
Yeah.
And I was so like bowled over by that. And I was thinking about it later and I thought, like, I think he's right. Like there was something even
Yeah.
in just talking to him very briefly
Yeah.
where like I felt this like incredible like gravitas from him. It just felt like the words he said like mattered in some way. He was not
Yeah.
frivolous at all. And like he most
Yeah.
of the time that we spent with him that day, he was like talking about the grief he had for this plant that he had loved for many years that after
Oh, yeah.
that eventually got like cut down very abruptly.
The
But yeah, like
wisteria.
speaking, yeah, the wisteria, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
and showed me pictures and everything of like
Yeah.
from a previous place where he had worked. But like that,
Yeah.
he was like really leading with his softness and his heart at that point. That it's so interesting to come into somebody's life right as it's expiring.
Yeah. 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 And for me, at that point, it had become normal, but for a long time it wasn't. He was this, like I say, he was this like very muscular, robust man that when he wanted to could really command a room, like an entire room. And you're right, he had this gravitas where um, he would people would begin to like orbit around him. He had that presence, he had that strength in him. And with that, I also knew him as very fiery, like not really soft, not harsh towards me. He was still quite loving towards me for a lot of my life, but I feel like as like an emotional quality in him, what I saw, especially once he was diagnosed and then after my mother died, was that the heartbreak that he went through really kind of softened him, for better and for worse in other ways. The softening wasn't what was worse, it was just the grief that then affected him. And I found it gradual for myself because it's like when you see someone every day, it's a lot harder to tell when they're changing and when they're different. And I don't remember when I noticed it, but I realized he had this softness and it kind of blew my mind. And that last year was just seeing that in all these different conversations. I felt like there were times when I was really absorbing um, like heartfelt wisdom from him that he had managed to like scrape out of the society that we live in, when it's not given much chance to develop in our world. And I really love your example and your experience with him because it reminds me that it reminds me of that same beauty and softness and how really kind he could be to people and how kind he was, especially that those last few years. There's so much beauty there.
So that brings us to Friday. Well, so we
Yeah,
ended up making dinner together at his place on
oh,
Friday night.
that was Friday then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that
And
that might be I thought it was a I wasn't 100% confident, but I thought it might be a nice thing to do even though your dad was not eating. Your dad had Do you remember how long before he died your dad stopped eating?
he hadn't eaten for almost, or at least 40 days by the time he died.
Oh my God.
I know that because he would talk about Jesus in the desert and say, what was he going through? Like, what was that like for him? And he was kind of, um, I think, empathizing with Jesus even more. His 40-day fast. It had been at least 40 days, if not more. He couldn't hold down anything.
You were
Yeah.
basically just giving him
Yeah.
ice for liquid.
Yeah. Yeah. Every so often I'd try a little bit of food and he'd throw it right back up immediately.
Yeah, I thought it might be nice for us to make dinner together at his place because even though he wouldn't be cooking or eating with us, he was mostly just sleeping at that point. And it
Yeah.
was hard to tell when he was asleep and when he was awake. But like,
Hmm.
I thought it might be nice for you and I to be there. His apartment was quite small, so the living room and the kitchen were next to each other, but almost the same room. So we were very close by him, and I thought that like us having a nice time making dinner together might just
Hmm.
like give a little bit of like a mood boost to the space.
Hmm.
And we ended
Yeah.
up doing many more bits as we cooked. Which was
Yeah.
like not totally my plan, but and then once we started doing it, I was like, okay, we'll kind of whisper, I don't want to bother him. And like we got into it. We were like
We did. We really did. We did all
it
kinds of
was
ones.
yeah, it was funny because we were cooking. So like the stuff we were cooking with, like you spat a raw chunk of potato at me.
I did. We did a bit where we were like, what was it? It was like dinner. I was, one of us was the person coming home from dinner, the spouse, and then we had this fight, and I like spit out something. I was
Yeah,
like,
we
well,
were a
I'm
very
already,
unhappy
yeah,
couple.
we were, we were all playing an extremely unhappy couple. I remember, like, yeah, like, well, spitting and I think I think I threw a cup of water in the air or something, threw water around.
Uh-huh,
I'm trying to
uh-huh.
remember.
There was a
And
psych ward, there was a psych ward scenario.
yeah, yeah. Or I kind of like pretended to like cower in the corner and hyperventilate because I thought I was going nuts or something.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. And so again,
Yeah,
like this felt maybe slightly risky to me, but it actually ended up feeling like again, like getting to see you in that really like creative, free, spontaneous energy was so nice. And I am so glad that we did that. Like I think that it brought a really like fresh energy to the space and the situation. And then also just the niceness of like cooking with loved ones is such a human foundational
yeah,
every day. It's like very quotidian but also very sacred, and so
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
so glad that we did that, and it ended up being his last night, which is unbelievable. Like it's so
yeah,
funny to tell the story now and see how like all the days fit together then, when like at the time it still felt like he probably had a lot of time. We had,
yeah,
death is so unpredictable, the whole thing. Like I didn't actually know if I was going to stay in town, um
yeah,
all of that. But I'm so
yeah,
glad that we had that like sweet, fun little dinner together that last night.
yeah. Me too. I do feel really lucky for that, and I didn't expect to have fun, which was like I was just like I thought I'd need to be grim and serious until it was all done. And I felt that at some point that was even what I should be doing. And so at first, when I was actually enjoying myself, I felt like I was doing something a bit scandalous, like actually smiling and laughing. It was like, oh, what's happening here? Enjoying myself. But I look back at that and I think not just that, and we'll get to the aftermath, but just the fact that I was able to feel the way that I did, that creative, spontaneous energy really lent so much to the funeral, and lent so much to my experience with his body, and brought me to this recognition for his death that like everything was allowed because my experience was so unique because there was no other family there. It was you and me, and you had even told me at the time that you could be kind of a background character. You could kind of blend into the surroundings and let whatever was happening happen. And I really, really appreciated that about what you really appreciated that about you, along with many other qualities, but that one in particular, um, for my ability to unleash the full range of my expression, I think really helped me so much with the grief process because people expect the grief process to look a very specific way. My dad was really studied on grief. He went to a lot of grief circles and read grief books, and his whole shtick was that everyone's grief is different. And I think this really, like your presence there and your ability to draw out whatever was actually there, allowed me to really experience my own unique relationship with him. And it was the fact that there was no other family present for it that allowed me to have, I don't know how else to say it, but full creative control of what was happening. That really was an extremely cathartic experience for me because I think that was the beginning of me really being able to fully do something on my own terms, where I didn't have to consider what he wanted or what other someone else wants or what a partner wants. That I just like no, like I can do this my way, and that really helped my grief process so much. It gave me a great deal of catharsis at the time, especially in comparison to what happened with my mother. And I really thank you for that. I thank you for to use the theater terms, being the background actor, so I could like steal my own show and like really express what was going on inside me and just take creative control so I could for myself feel like, because the grief process, once someone dies, it's never about them, it's about your relationship to them. And so I could, as it were, in those terms, take center stage for myself and do whatever it was that I wanted. And that helps so much. So I'll say it probably many times before it's over, but for just that reason alone, thank you.
You're so welcome, and it's just like music to my heart's ears to like hear all of this because I think it's so nice that you're sharing that aspect because, and again, like I'm not like joking around with why I think this theater and improv part that we kind of stumbled into that week like was
Yeah,
so key. It's like
yeah,
you're right. There is, for some reason, for so many people, an expectation that this has to be really grim and it has to suck and like death death sucks and then we
yeah,
move on from it and go back to the good parts of life. Like it was it was so cool to play around in that space of like, well, obviously lots of this is out of our control, but what is in our control and what aspects of experience are available to us? Like there was such a wide spectrum. Like there were the time stretched out for me, it like dilated so much over those days. And
yeah.
like there were so many qualities and textures to the experience,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
including
I,
like intense laughter and creativity and like Yeah, I did check in with you a couple times when we were like playing around while we were cooking. Like, do you think this is okay for your dad? Like, if I were on my deathbed, the number one noise I think I would like to hear is the sound of my child laughing and having a good time. You know what I mean? Like that sounds amazing to me. But
Yeah,
yeah, I love hearing the thing about the relationship with him being the thing that was really important at that point, and like you getting to take center stage. I love you phrasing it creative control. I think that's
yeah,
fascinating to hear that in the context of death. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because I think one of the themes that's arisen for me from that and talking with another friend is that it's so easy to go along with the structure that's already put in place as to how death is handled. Like, when is the body picked up? What do we do with the body? How are we supposed to act around the body? What are we, like, timeline? All of these different things is so kind of scripted, even. And so, what I liked about this mood of improv is that for me, it helped me break the script and like finally feel what was happening and finally go with what I wanted to do. And everything about death is so scripted because we consider death separate from our lives. We kind of compartmentalize it and put it away over there. And it's the specific event that's in a box, and we act a certain way within the box, and we don't think about it outside of the box. And um, we tend to go along with the people around us telling us what to do. And another thing I really liked about what you did is that over that time, you always turned it back to me and what I wanted when I was interfacing with the hospice staff, especially. You would ask me, well, what do you want? And I'm, oh, yeah, what do I want? And it was kind of this realization in me, like, okay, um, it's on my terms. I don't need to follow the script, which is the same thing of, I think, improv, is that there was no script. And so I feel like I took that with me as far as the actual handling of all of the situation once he died, was that okay, there's no script. I'm free to do it how I want to do. Um, which was which allowed me to give myself over into that situation, like you said, which allowed time to stretch on and on and on. Those days afterwards felt like eternities to me. I just felt like it just didn't end. It really felt much longer than 2 or 3 days. What did I have them for? 42 hours? Felt like a week, felt like more. It was really interesting to be in that portal, to be in that portal with you. And for him to hear that happiness, which was something that I was really trying to get across to him in his last months, um, was that I wanted him to feel that he could go. So what I would say is, Dad, I'm good. I've got some steps here I've got a direction for a possible career. I've got a job. I've got friends that care about me. I've got people that are willing to give me support and resources to help me after you're gone. I have friends everywhere that I can be with. Like, I'll be okay. That's the one, when it's a parent's death, I think that's like the one thing that the parent really needs to be sure of, is that, will my child be okay without me? Because they have this intense primal need to make sure their child is okay. And death is like this reckoning where, like, did I do a good enough job? One. And two, like, are they going to be okay? And so I spent those months really bringing it home to him that I was going to be okay. I said it in as many ways as I could. And so when I look back on you describing that, where I had a friend come and we were enjoying ourselves with each other and I was laughing and happy, um, I hadn't even considered how he might have actually really benefited from hearing that, from hearing my happiness, because those were hard times for the both of us, and there wasn't much happiness. So it's nice to look back and think on that and go, okay, yeah, if I were 80 and on my deathbed, I would love everyone around me to be laughing and happy, enjoying their lives, and seeing my exit as just another part of life, as not something even horrible. Of course, there's grief, but we grieve because we love people so much. They're the same thing. Grief is love. It's not a horrible thing at all.
I love the way you're describing the going off script or it being totally unscripted and you getting to choose really what you wanted at each turn. Like, there
Yeah,
are so many ways people, especially being in states of shock and grief, like go along with these fucked up scripts in like American
yeah,
death culture. And
yeah,
I love it's really fun to have all these like theater metaphors and talking about you being center stage and like it being unscripted and going off script. Like, I think that's so powerful.
yeah,
Um, there's also, this was part of the fullness for me too. It was really interesting that week to be with how it was so like monumental and completely sacred. And then it was also like very everyday. Like, it was dinner
yeah,
time on Friday, so we were making dinner because we need to
yeah,
eat a meal. And we'll
yeah,
talk later about what it was like for the 2 days afterward. But like, I would come in the morning. I was staying somewhere else. I would come in the morning, like with coffee or whatever, and say hi to your dad's body. And it was all very like, death is normal. This is an everyday,
yeah,
like, beings are being born and dying constantly. And it's like, it's a part of this. The sun keeps rising and setting. And it was both completely it was really a peak experience of my life to get to be there with the two of you. Was so it was so big, and it was obviously one of the biggest moments of your dad's life was his departure and all of that. And then it was also just so normal and human and
yeah,
everyday.
yeah. That's the paradox, huh?
Yeah.
That was what was so strange to me, was like this monumental, massive thing is happening, and yet it's just another part of life. It's like, what's that book? I never read it, but I love the title of that Jack Cornfield book. After the ecstasy, the laundry. I wouldn't, and I did say to people that I felt those days were its own kind of ecstasy, which is, if I weren't in it, I would find that an extremely bizarre statement. I go, what? You think that was ecstasy? And it wasn't ecstasy like I was blissed out. I wasn't feeling like whole body jhana pleasure or something like that. I was just so in the moment that all semblance of time fell away, and I had the creative control, and whatever I was expressing was allowed. It always is, but for some reason that feeling that it isn't allowed just fell off. And so that was its ecstasy, like the ecstasy of when you're a child and you can just exist and you can just express yourself however you want. You can be happy, you can be sad, you can be whatever. You can be dramatic about it if you want. Like, all of those things, I think, were how it was ecstatic, this feeling of losing your everyday mind and your everyday kind of perception of things, and just allow that to like self-destruct for a while. And then it's like whatever is there can be there. Um,
100%. It was ecstatic for me in the same ways. It's part of the power of death and the opportunity I think it brings is it has this intensity and this like raw cutting through bullshit. There was no bullshit happening those days. Like, you know what I mean? Like, everything was we were looking at things head on, and then it was the next thing, and then it was the next thing, and it was so full and alive and full of everything. And it we were not in the everyday mind bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, it was
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about Saturday because things started changing in a really big way, like Friday night, early Saturday morning.
Yeah. Yeah. By Saturday morning, he was still verbal, but either that night after you had left or the next morning, he started throwing up either bile or blood. I never knew. I never found out. The nurses never visited until they stopped. They didn't stop visiting. It was just the timing. Um, they didn't visit up until his death by that point. And he was not, he was miserable. He was. And I was too, for the most part. And he suggested that I just start him on the morphine and give him a little extra so he could go. Um, and later on, I realized at that moment that he actually was more ready than I was for a while. I think he'd been feeling that for some time. I don't know. I'll never know. But I reckon he'd been feeling that for some time and finally just came out and said it. And I realized I was the one reluctant to give that to him. Um, and so I called the nurse and talked to her. I realized again that he'd been living really uncomfortably, and what I was trying to do with the various medications on my own, it just wasn't helping. So she was really helpful with me and got him started on a specific kind of regimen. And so I did this amount and this dose and gave him just a tiny little bit of morphine. What I find interesting was that I was talking to her about it, and she told me that they give they give, I won't get the numbers right, but when typically when someone's in their last week of life, they get, um, again, I don't know, I'll get the numbers right, but like 100 milliliters of morphine an hour or something like that, an hour. And that's when someone's in their last week of life, and it's to keep them comfortable. And that whole day, I think at most I either gave him 50 or 100 milliliters once, just once. But what was very interesting to me was that his body immediately changed. Like you and I found out pretty quickly once you were there that something was happening. We weren't really sure, but something had shifted, like a new chapter had started. He had really relaxed finally. I had seen him for weeks be quite uncomfortable, and did my best, but couldn't really like crack it. And then he finally relaxed, and his breathing changed. As I was saying earlier, his breathing really changed. He really relaxed. He just looked like he was resting and sleeping so peacefully. And um, at the time, it was interesting looking. I kind of wasn't sure if it was the morphine or not. I'm sure it played a role, but when I think about it, and what the nurse said, that in the last week people get an hour, or not every hour they get the same dosage I gave them once. I started to think, I don't, at first I thought it might have been the morphine that started this change, and then I thought that it actually might have been more the symbolism of it. The fact that I was giving this to him now, that I was comfortable with doing it, kind of meant to him that I was saying, okay, I am really surrendering to this now. Whatever needs to happen can happen. The only reason I say that was because everything went so quickly after that. His breathing changed. He got so peaceful. And you and I both noticed over that time that something was different. Like I say, you wrote me that note. You said, I think he's closer to the light. I remember walking in from, I think, getting groceries, and it looked like he was underwater. Just the way he was breathing was so fluid and so peaceful. And, for context, I'd never seen him breathe peacefully in his life. He always had kind of this gasping breath. Even sleeping, I never saw him really peaceful. He'd snore a lot. But here at this moment, he was breathing like his whole body breathing with him, not just kind of this choking in the throat from the snoring or the sniffing at the throat. His whole body was participating in his breathing. And he looked so peaceful. And you had lent me this book called The 11th Hour. And the 11th hour was about what you say to what happens in the last moments of a person's life and what you might want to say to them, what will happen so you know this. I don't want to say symptoms, the signs of what happens. And I started to see some of those. Um, and so as the day progressed, at first it was just, oh, something unusual is happening. And by about midday, I was like, oh, he might be starting the dying process. But that book says it could last up to a week or even more. So there was still the sense of, okay, something's changed. He's starting this process, but we had no idea how much time would be left. And I sat down with him twice that day at different times, and I said more or less the same thing. I asked him if he could hear me, and he could talk kind of around after like 12, but as the day progressed, he could more just make noises. And I asked him, can you hear me? And I said to him what I thought was happening, what the book recommended, and what I felt. I said, it looks to me like um, that you're starting to die. It looks to me you're starting the dying process. Um, I think that's what's happening to you. And I just want to say it back to you that that's what I'm observing, that I think this is starting for you now. And I said, um, more or less, maybe not this exact language, but you do what you need to do. Like, you can do this now. It's okay. I understand that this is what's happening, and I'm going to miss you terribly, but I understand that this is happening now, and it's okay. And I know for years he struggled with feeling like a burden to me. So this part I felt was so important to resolve that feeling, or at least convey what I felt to him. I said to him that I know you saw me so stressed this whole time, not just these weeks, but just stressed with the burden of all of this. I know you saw me angry. I know you saw me stressed. I know you thought you were a burden. But I just want you to know, if we went backwards in time and I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing. I would do it all exactly the same. I would still be here with you. I would still do it again. And that is not going to change. And I sat down with him twice and I did that. And I told him I don't regret this at all. No matter how stressed, no matter how angry I was, I do not regret that I am here with you. I love you and I'm going to miss you so much. And then while he was there too, I remember I read him some poetry from Walt Whitman. I read it to him earlier that year when we were both conscious, and there was a couple lines in there that really filled us both with this intense grief. I didn't realize it at the time because the thing with him, especially with Walt Whitman, is that the poetry can mean different things to different people. There were lines in there where I said, um, what was the line? No one else can travel that road for you. You must travel it for yourself. And it's one thing to say that to a 20 something, and it's another thing to say that to someone who's dying. And I said that to him, and suddenly both of our eyes filled with tears. This was earlier again, about months before. And I suddenly felt like I felt what I was saying, and I felt what he was feeling. And I realized, like, these are the words to a dying man. These aren't the words to someone going their own way to live their life. And then there was another line, you're also asking me questions, and I answer that I cannot answer. You must find out for yourself. And that really played into the poetry I ended up writing after his death. But I read that at the time, and we were both filled with so much grief and love for each other. I just remember we sat there, snotty tears. And then that day, as he was dying, I read it to him again. And then it was nightfall. I don't think I don't think I missed anything now. But it was nightfall, and you and I were just seated near him, listening, talking to each other, and I started playing some music. I played 3 songs. The first one I played was called I Want You to Live Forever. It's exactly what it says. The second song was called Dust in the Wind. He played that for me around the same time I read that poem. And I remember I got into his lap and I wept and I wept and I wept. And that, so I played it that night. And then I played the third song, Dustin, Father and Son. And we both noticed something really curious was that something started to change in him as soon as I put the music on. His breathing really started to change. We were chatting and listening to this music. By Father and Son, which he had sent me either that year or the year before, um, I really started to feel a change in his breathing. You noticed it, and I noticed it. And it was such a mysterious event because playing that song, which was, I don't know how else to put it, that was our song, Father and Son. And I put that song on. His breathing really started to slow perceptibly. As that song ended, there were lines. Now there's a way, and I know that I have to go away. I know that I have to go. And in the song, it's sung by the son, but at that moment in time, it could have easily been the father, my father, saying that to me. And so by the time that song ended, um, he was maybe breathing like once per minute with long, long gaps in between his breath. And so at that time, I remember you kind of directed me to him, and I knelt by his head. I just stroked his head and I kissed him on the cheek. And the song ended. And I thought about playing another song, but I didn't. I wanted his last moments just to be peace, quiet, and me rubbing his head and kissing him on the cheek and telling him it was okay. And then I just did that until his breathing stopped. We weren't really sure when it had stopped, you and I. Remember that. We kept watching because it got really infrequent. There were a couple times where he breathed once more than we were expecting, but it did stop. And I remember around that time, there was so much peace in the room. I could feel it, like tangible, mysterious, otherworldly peace in the room. It was pervading the air. It was like every particle in that room, in the universe even, was filled with peace. And I looked at you, and I remember I felt like we were two animals looking at each other. Like something dropped away in me, and I just felt the primal reality of what was happening. I remember I said to you, I don't know anything.
I forgot that you said that. You did say that.
I don't know anything. And it wasn't like I wasn't freaked out. I wasn't like, oh my God, I don't know anything. It was like, oh my God, I don't know anything. It was like relief and wonder at the same time. Like, oh, I don't know anything at all. And the mysteriousness of that, the fact that his breathing had changed listening to the song, almost as if he chose when to go, which I hear happens. But even that mysterious quality that pervaded the room afterwards, that peace, I'd never felt anything like that. And it completely, I wasn't expecting to feel that. I wasn't expecting to see his death be so peaceful after he had suffered not eating for so long and was uncomfortable. Um, I was expecting like a gasp, or a rattle, but it was soft at the end, soft and quiet and peaceful. And then I got into bed. You suggested I get into bed with him and hold him. And I got into bed and I held him. And I wept and I wept and I wept and I wept. I really
I would
sobbed.
actually say I it feels like a distinction worth making I think that you wailed. And
Yeah, yeah,
I say that
yeah, I did.
because it was one of the moments where I most experienced you completely given over to it, and
Yeah,
you were just this gorgeous, raw, unfiltered animal in the completely primal wail of having the immediacy of your father going.
yeah, you're right. I wailed. I don't think I'd ever cried like that before. I might have kind of did with my mother, but I think the environment and the suddenness of that event and the different people around it made it really difficult. And with him, I felt no blockage towards that anymore. I just wailed and wailed and wailed. You're right. I cradled his head. I just laid there with him. I don't remember what happened after that, if anything else did that night.
Um, we were very much like taking it slow, like literally having a cup of tea in service of like remembering to stay very slow. Like there can be a thing that happens at the moment of death where it's like, I gotta go tell people. There's so much to do.
Yeah,
Let's
right.
go be busy with, there's so much to do. And so we really like, yeah, it's interesting. I don't remember a lot about that next hour or two either, but I know that we were just like very slow with it and like, hey, there's nothing actually that we need to do right now. So let's just like really take our time with
Yeah,
this, like, because we're so in it. Like that's that particular portion of the portal. Um, Eventually, I think I went to the grocery store to get some dry ice, but I think we just sat. You
yeah,
got in bed with him and held him, and then I think we just sat for a little bit and like let our bodies, because I felt that too. Your cats felt it. We all
yeah.
felt that
Oh, right.
total stillness in the apartment. Like it was
Yeah,
so big and it's a lot on the body. Like the whole situation, it's so much to be with. So I think we were just taking it really slow and sitting with all of it and talking to each other and talking to him.
yeah. You're right. That's an interesting thing I do want to mention is his cats. Is that last day he was alive, the younger cat was on his leg sleeping with him, like just laying there with him. They seemed almost even more interested than they usually were those last few weeks. Um, it kind of kept a bit of distance, actually. But then that last day, they really were, she was laying on him, laying around him, spending a lot of time with him. And I remember as soon as he went, that dropped again. You know, as soon as his breath stopped, which is just such an interesting thing. Like animals, they'll spend time there, and then they'll check, and they'll see, and then that'll be it. They'll just, you know, they don't have this mental structure in place on all of this. You know, to them, it's as natural as breathing. You know, oh, they stopped breathing. Well, that's natural, I suppose. They just went about their business after that. You know, he was someone to be with that last day, and then after that, he wasn't.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was really fascinating for me too, the way that cat in particular was like acting as such a doula on his last day and then was like, okay, he's
yeah,
dead now. So anyway, like what's there to eat for me? Like it was
yeah.
so again, like
About that.
so every day, you know?
Yeah,
Um yeah, the breathing thing too. That Saturday, like for me, my favorite things to do that day while he was actively dying on Saturday was to just sit by him, near
mm,
him. I don't know, maybe anywhere from like 3 to 8 feet from him, and either watch him or just close my eyes and sit in space with him. Like it was such a incredibly like rich and awe-inspiring experience for me. And where was I going with that? My whole mind just went blank. The whole time we're talking about this, I'm so like transported to being there, you know?
Yeah,
I
me too.
feel like so there. Oh, so I think in the hours afterward and then the 2 days afterward, one of my favorite things to do again was just to watch him. It is a profound experience to watch a human body that's not breathing. It is
Yeah,
really disorienting because you never
yeah,
see human bodies that are not breathing, and like you keep expecting a breath to happen and it doesn't, and
yep.
your
It
body is
doesn't.
like, what is that? Like it was. So I think I was doing a lot of that Saturday night too, is just like um a deaf midwife named Narinder, who's been really influential for me, talks about how important it is to just give your body a lot of time to adjust to the new reality of what has happened.
Yeah,
And I think taking in the like lack of breath by looking at them is an important part of that.
yeah. And I think this is the point where I talk about what happened between my mother and my father. Is my mother died suddenly. We weren't expecting that quickly. And the whole event was a sudden thing, but between knowing something was wrong and her dying was more or less 3 weeks. And in those minutes afterwards, I was 17. I broke down crying, and then I left the room. I had been with her body maybe at most 5 minutes. And then after that, pretty quickly, the hospital took her body away. And that was awful. I couldn't tell what part of it was awful at the time. I mean, a parent dies, there's always a part of it that's awful. Um, and I was 17, things were happening beyond my comprehension. But when I look back, what was awful was that I didn't get this time to adjust to that reality. Um, and the amount of time I got with my dad like really helped me adjust to that fact that he was dead. Like I got to be with his body. And you got the dry ice because we needed to preserve his body. And it was also January, so it wasn't terribly hot in the first place. These kind of details are helpful, I suppose, if you're in a hotter climate or in the summer. But we got fortunate in some ways that his body stayed more or less the same as far as what we were seeing from the beginning to the time the hearse picked him up. The only change I remember seeing was that his fingers started to turn blue. Everything else was the same, as far as I remember. And so that time after he died, one of the main things that it helped me with was to adjust to the fact that he was dead, which I didn't get with my mother. And that's part of why I was so dead set on keeping his body, was because I knew what it was like to have someone die and then have their body like immediately, not violently, but emotionally kind of violently taken from you. Because it is a violence, no matter when it happens. Because I remember when the hearse took him and I felt like something was getting torn from me. Um, but there is a point where that is what happens. But to reach a point where you're prepared for it and feel ready for it is so helpful. And I did not get that with my mother. But because of what we did, because of your help and my determination to not repeat that, I did get that with him. And I feel like that has made an absolute world of difference in my grieving process after, what is it now? Actually, what day is it?
It's almost
It's the
exactly
20th
six
here.
months, Dylan. It's almost exactly 6 months. We did
Yeah,
not do that on purpose. Isn't that amazing?
yeah, yeah. For you, it's the 19th, right? And he died on the 18th. So it's almost, yeah, wow. That is amazing, Jane. That's amazing. Yeah. But I say, and things always change. I don't know. I can't speak for Dylan 6 months from now or Dylan a year from now. But Dylan, right now, I can say that my grieving process between my mother and my father has been very different. One, because they're different people. Two, because I'm in different stages of my life. But a big part of it, three, was because the aftermath I handled very differently with him. I was able to handle it very differently because now I was an adult. And with my mother, I couldn't. My father was alive and there was hospital staff and all of this. So I feel, at least in the immediate aftermath of his death, like the first 6 months, it made a world of difference to have those 42 hours because I got to speak to him that whole time because I felt that he was still there. And there's probably a part that was um, like a subjective experience, like I was still relating to him as if he were still there. But I think there was something else happening. I really do, that he was still there. In one of the poems I wrote, I felt like the first day he looked like he was just sleeping. But by the second day, it didn't look like he was sleeping. It looked like he was dead. And watching that change, feeling that either subtly through him, I think there was that, but also in how I was relating to him really helped me as time went on. And then I reached a point where I felt comfortable letting him go, letting him get picked up, and ending my time with his body. I felt that, again, it's so early to say, but that what I did with my mom took the span of years to kind of, um, and it's ongoing. I don't think it ever ends, but a lot of that initial process that I could do with my father in those 42 hours took quite a long time with my mother. I had no space for it. I had no people around for it. I didn't have the vocabulary around it. I was like a 17-year-old man in America. It was like, all right, back to work kind of thing. Back to that grind. On that grind. And I did. A week after she died, I went back to school. I just pretended everything was fine. I remember reading once quite recently that, if a parent dies and you look at both children and one children seems to be doing very poorly, they can't finish their work, they're crying all the time, they're really upset, they're kind of a wreck, and they say, I don't know how I can go on, that kind of stuff. And you have the other child, and the other child's like outperforming themselves, straight A's, star student, athletic achievement, like, oh, I'm fine. That child is actually the one to be more worried about. That's what I read. And it was an interesting thought because when I look back at that time after she died, I really kind of like went right back to my life. And I tried counseling, it didn't really work. Um, I hardly talked to anyone about it. I didn't talk about what I was feeling, I didn't even know how. And I feel like on the inside, for years afterwards, I was churning and churning. I was a mess on the inside. But I felt like I had no space for that, either in my life or with anyone around me. So what was still there was repressed or put inside me. It affected so much of my life, and I couldn't talk to anyone about it for years, partly because of how I was raised and how I felt about expressing emotions, and partly because I didn't feel anyone would understand. So a little external, internal kind of thing. And it was really challenging. So I read a statement like that about one kid being a mess and the other kid being okay and pretend, or at least, high achieving. And I think, yeah, I understand that. If someone's really kind of falling apart after someone dies, then I feel that, again, everyone's grief is different, but that is just as valid. That is a good sign that they feel that they can. Like this whole thing I've been talking with friends about lately and feeling that strength isn't actually being strong and stoic and kind of like a Clint Eastwood character who smokes a cigar and spits nicotine into a bucket and walks off stoically into the sunset. Like it's actually strength is the ability to be soft. Strength is the ability to actually express and feel your emotions, even if you're in a situation where other people perceive it as weakness. Actually, especially in those situations. So it's kind of turned on its head for me. Where being younger, I felt that strength was, especially as a male, strength was something that you like never cry, never express something vulnerable or something you're self-conscious about. The only acceptable emotion is anger, all these kinds of things. And so um, I feel all of that affected the way that I approached the aftermath of my mother's death. And I had I felt so differently by the time of my father's death that I think a lot of what was blocking my grief for my mother was allowed to express itself with my father.
Yeah, what you're saying about strength really resonates. I think it's what was there's so many beautiful things about the experience to me. Maybe the most beautiful was getting to be in the room and just sitting back in the room and witnessing as you wailed, as we talked about earlier. Like that was, I really resonate with there being such a quality of strength of meeting that. It's just really what your body needed and wanted to do, and it takes so much strength to meet that and give yourself to it. And that oh, it's so hard to describe, but it was so obvious to my system. What I was witnessing was just this like unbelievably powerful raw fresh grief that I've so rarely been in the presence of somebody who's so given over to it that it's expressing so in such an unfiltered way.
Wow, thank you. I reckon that's cultural, that we're kind of culturally programmed not to do that. And so it takes kind of a shedding of that to really feel that you can express yourself primally instead of be this kind of proper personality that, I don't even think it's a man thing. It's just a human thing in certain societies that you just can't express the raw emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard very different stories about, for example, like funerals and rituals after death in like India.
Right.
Um,
Right.
is there anything else? Yeah, I'm eager to talk about to move into that like that space of 42 hours that was so it was 42 hours technically, but it was so full and wonky time wise and everything. Is there anything else that
Liminals.
strikes you so liminal? Like that word doesn't even feel like strong enough to
No.
Um,
Yeah.
is there anything else from Saturday night that feels relevant? I mean, basically oh, okay. One thing I want to say is something we did not do on Saturday, which is we did not call the hospice.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Oh, yeah. That ends up being its own situation. But you're right, because it's all tied back into what you were saying about we stopped, we had some tea, which is like, okay, there's no rush. Nothing needs to happen. Nothing has to happen. We can wait and we can think. And we don't need to just automatically go into the next step. We're so conditioned to like just bam, 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 knock things out without a pause. And and I think that prepares us very poorly for death because we operate off of that conditioning. Bam, bam, bam. Okay, he's dead. Bam, call the hospice. Bam, pick up the car. Bam. Okay, now I'm in bed. Oh, fuck. Like I didn't have time with him. Like instantly that kind of operating can really um, diminish what you are able to receive from the beauty of what's happening, the beauty and the grief, although they're the same thing. There's a Bob Dylan line, behind every beautiful thing, there's been some kind of pain. And so I think that actually ties in here because, a romance, parents dying, like it's never, it's never one note. It's never one color. It's not either beautiful or painful. It's usually both in various mixtures and proportions, but there's usually both there. And so we waited and we decided not to call them that night. And I don't think we even called them maybe until like late morning on Sunday, or maybe even early afternoon, probably the late morning. But it was kind of unfolding as it went along, like the plan wasn't to keep them exactly for 42 hours. The plan was, there was no plan. This was what was beautiful. It was just, okay, we'll keep them tonight and we'll regroup in the morning, see how we feel, do what we want to do, and then just see. It was like whatever we wanted to do, we would take the space and lengthen it so that we could fit what we wanted to do. It wasn't that we had a pre-allotted amount of time and we had to fit everything in really quick. It was that if things kept arising to do, we decided to stretch it out. I decided to stretch it out. So at first it was, yeah, I guess I can talk about what happened with hospice. At first it was just, I want to keep him longer. At first it was, I want to keep him until, I think it was 10 a.m. the next morning. There was this whole dialogue that had to happen first, though. I called them. It was the first full day after he died, and I felt this like really, this strengthened me. I was really surprised at how I felt. I remember that. Like I felt really like we're gonna do this. We're gonna get this done. I'm gonna call them. I didn't know what to expect really. But you asked me what I wanted to do, and I called hospice. I said I want to keep him for longer. I want to keep him until tomorrow. I wanted at least a full day with him. I talked to hospice, and they said um, that they had never gotten that request before to keep someone as long as I wanted, which is absurd on its own. But then she said something very interesting, which was that she needed to talk to her manager, which is like you hear that in a retail store, you hear that in a restaurant. I was not expecting to hear that for a hospice service. And that really surprised me. But my attitude going into it was like, this is what I want. How are you going to help me? Because this was about me, finally, I spent a lot of my life doing it for him, and I needed to. But this was my time to have what I needed, to grieve what I needed to grieve, to do what I wanted to do. And I was not going to compromise. They were going to compromise. So I felt in me like this strength of like, this is what I want. How are you going to help me? Like, I'm not going to be supple and soft and kind of bend around reality. Reality's going to bend around me. You know, it's going to my will over theirs, I suppose. And to their credit, they really listened to me. And they did it and they worked with me to do it. We never did find out if it was a legal problem or just some kind of rule, but the nurse came by and pronounced him the next day. I think you were gone, maybe getting groceries or something, and pronounced him and um, pronounced his death as the 19th instead of the 18th, which I think helped them kind of save face. It let them look like they weren't waiting forever. Maybe, I don't know if it was legal or maybe they just didn't want to look like they were kind of slacking. I don't know. I never did find out. But they pronounced him on the 19th and put that on the death certificate so that when they picked him up the next day, it didn't look kind of unusual. I remember the nurse came once and then came twice because she forgot to destroy some of his medication. And the second time she came in, she accidentally slammed the door. She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. And I said, well, don't worry, it's not like you're going to wake him up. And she just didn't laugh. Just did not laugh. I don't think she was upset or anything, but I think when you're around someone who's whose person who's just died, you're a bit delicate around them most of the time, which I understand. You never know. It's a volatile situation. You don't know. They could laugh one minute and rage the next. It's more or less what I did. But I just felt like humorous, and I don't think she knew what to do with that. So you're not going to wake him up, not going to bother him anymore. And so they worked with me on that. And then the next morning, and I reckon we rewind and go back to Sunday. But on Monday, that morning, I actually still didn't feel ready. I think we had settled on 11 a.m., but it was about 10. And I actually don't want to do this. Yeah. And so I called them and changed it to 3. And then by like 1 or 2, I did feel ready. Um, I just felt like I needed a few more hours and not a whole nother night. So hospice, I can't speak for all of the states or all hospices, but that hospice was not used to that kind of request. But they did work with me on it, which I think was is worth giving credit to them for, because I was worried that I'd face a lot more resistance or have to jump through some kind of hoop or many hoops, but they did work with me on it and um, didn't present any emotional resistance. No one got mad at me. No one tried to, like, sir, like, we can't do this. Like, they were confused. They didn't know what to do just because they never got that request, but they worked with me.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that is the thing we kept coming back to is like your body needs a certain amount of time. We don't know how much time that will be, but you will know when it starts to feel like, okay, it's time.
Yeah.
And we just needed to like wait and see.
Yeah.
And you knew when you were ready, and it's going to be a different amount of time for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think usually it's probably more than people estimate. Maybe
Yep.
not, but I've heard as a good figure around 3 days. And I was pretty close to what I needed. I needed 42 hours. But I've heard 3 days. I think, I don't know, I can't give a recommendation or a thought, but I was on my own for one thing. And so it might have been even longer if there were other people around that wanted their own moments, you know?
Right.
So I was on my own and I didn't need to think about anyone else. I didn't need to talk to other people, didn't need to organize anything and collaborate with other people. So I think the more people involved, the longer it might take, but I don't know ultimately. Um, but for me, I was on my own, and this is the advantage of this was the blessing that emerged out of the burden of being the only one there was that yes, it was difficult, but then the blessing was I had it on my terms. I didn't need to talk with any other siblings or relatives. I could just do it for myself. I had full creative control. That word again. So yeah, I mean, 3 days is not a hard and fast rule, of course, but generally, I think even just one night, like a vigil, um, I think that does a lot. And I think people used to do that more, even in Western countries, is hold a vigil.
Yeah, let's talk about that process on Sunday because I think that was, again, like one of the richest parts for me. It's my first time doing that. And yeah, why don't you take it away?
Yeah. One of the the things that just happened throughout the day was that I just kept talking to him. I just said whatever I was feeling. And I think that's a good way to set this up is that his body was still there. I was talking to him. There was there was no difference in my communication to him. And I felt and I feel that he was there. And if there was a difference, the difference was not that I was communicating less, but that I was communicating more. I felt a little freer even to express myself towards him because he was free of his limitations. Because everyone has their limitations. A lot of people might not be able to hear what you want to say to them. And I think that was one quality that marked all of Sunday and Monday was that I talked and said whatever I wanted to say. That was important to me. I remember I came in that day into the living room and I looked at him and I touched his face. I touched him a lot. I said, "Oh, Dad, you're so cold." And I cried all over again um, because I feel like my body realized what was happening. And so I would talk to him even on my own. You know, it wasn't like you were around and then I was putting on a show. It was like how maybe we talk to dogs differently when someone's watching us or something like that, you know? But with him, I would talk when we were alone. I spoke to him. I said, "Well, Dad, you know, I'm going to have breakfast now," or something like that. Um, and one of the first things I did was I wrote poetry and I recited it to him. I wrote a few different poems, but you were there for them. I wrote them while sitting next to him, and then I would recite them, but not just recite them. I had a little stage presence. I recited them as if I were on stage with the flourishes and dramatic effect. And I felt like that was just one example of my creative control was allowing myself the, to make of this whatever I wanted to make of it and not be held by someone's expectations of what a funeral is supposed to be like. I don't know if it was Sunday or Monday, but I remember we danced around him. Do you remember what day that was?
Um, I think I don't remember. I think it was maybe part
Yeah,
of the cleaning on Sunday, but I'm not sure.
might have been. Might have been.
Yeah.
So I'll just talk about that too. There was a moment where, a long moment, where we listened to music around him and we just danced, you know? And I think what's funny for me is when I look back at that time, I felt so free. I'm always free. But in that moment, I think what I felt free in was I felt free to feel anything I wanted to feel. It was such a relief to me. When you're in a caregiver role, I think often people feel limited in what they're allowed to feel. And so they might repress that or only express that to other people. But around him, I felt what I was regaining was my ability to feel whatever I wanted to feel. Like I was becoming, I don't know, not becoming, I always was, but I wanted to say becoming a whole person again, but that wasn't true. I'm always whole. It's just that my emotional expression was becoming whole again. I was regaining the ability to be happy, even to express that and be happy around him or be upset around him. I became upset later that day, very upset with him. I felt like the role of being his caregiver and his best friend and being there for him, I had to squash a lot of my expression because of just the roles we were in. So to me, that dancing actually felt very important because it was one way among a few that my emotional expression came alive again. That we could dance, you know, and I would dance on my own, but it seemed significant to me to actually dance around him. And I reckon some cultures do things like that too, where they dance. They don't just sit there and cry and wail. they do that, but they also dance. It's also a beautiful event of community. That's what I think. I don't know, but it felt to me really natural to be actually dancing there with you. It felt spontaneous and free and just like that. And there was this whole thing where I, especially that day on Sunday, I did feel like he was still around on some subtle level, like the breath stops. But I know, it's like in yogic traditions and otherwise, they often say that more subtle life signs are still in the body for some amount of time after the breath stops. And I feel that. I felt that especially with him, that his presence was still very much there. And so it wasn't just for me. I think for him, he probably really loved seeing that, seeing me be happy, you know, like right away, honestly, that I could still be happy. I felt it was for me and it was benefiting him. I wasn't doing it for him, but a parent always loves seeing their child happy. And so I read him some poetry. I wrote him poetry and I recited to him with you there as an audience. And yeah, that was beautiful because I think for me, that was like the meaning making I was trying to do on his death, which is, I think, a big part of grief and the grief process is it's like, what does this death mean to me? What does it mean to my life? What does it mean to my heart? What does it mean to my choices, my life path, everything? When it's a death that's significant. And so I feel like writing that poetry was my way to make meaning out of his death, make meaning out of what had happened. And, to me, again, I come back to this thing there's no difference between life and death. They are two sides of the same coin. And there's no difference on that same token between beauty and pain. They are two sides of the same coin. So for me, a lot of what I love about creativity and art is the ability to make beauty from suffering and pain. And I don't quite mean the tortured artist that writes something that's so painful that it's beautiful. I mean the ability to redeem suffering and redeem pain, and from it have a redemption of sorts, where it's like, it's not just, and it could include it, but it's not just you putting your pain into art. It's you um, like digesting and releasing and making meaning out of the pain in such a way that it's healing. So I felt my impulse for writing those poems was to write something for myself that was healing and beautiful and made meaning that was beautiful and not just nihilistic, not just dark. Because another difference between his death and my mother's death was that when my mother died, my meaning structure was entirely created within the confines of my church. And when she died, that just went kablamo. There was no way for me to reconcile this sudden, horrible event with what I was taught about God as a man that takes care of things and God has a plan and all of that. I could not reconcile that with this thing that had happened. So the meaning that had been handed to me by my community completely evaporated and dissolved. So I was left for a long time agnostic or atheist, and that was the meaning that was handed to me through scientific materialism. But it made I not made me, but with that I was quite miserable, thinking the world was this dead thing, and death is just you're just dead, and there's nothing, and nothing has any meaning. That's just another meaning structure. Nothing has any meaning. So what was different in this case was that I feel like I had control and agency over the meaning I was going to give the event, the meaning I was going to give to his death. And it wasn't the meaning that my culture handed to me, whether my Christian culture or the broader scientific materialist culture. It was the meaning I wanted to have from it that I really felt was true for me. So I think that's where that poetry came from, was this, okay, like, what is beautiful here? What do I feel here that's beautiful? okay, what is beautiful is true. That was my, that about sums it up. If it's beautiful, it's true. Not just kind of aesthetically beautiful, but if I feel a response, then it's true. And so I wrote that poetry. I didn't think about any of that, but when I look back, I think that was the impulse. And then there was the bathing and the anointing.
I love that a theme that's coming up is your agency in this whole experience.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
dancing, it's interesting. The dancing was not a part that had stuck with me as super front and center. I'm so glad you brought it up. I think it's one of the reasons why this felt to me like we did kind of have a home funeral because it's like another aspect to the
Mm,
dancing is like it felt like we were really taking our time and finding ways to celebrate your dad, you know? Like it was really
mm.
about celebrating his life and not just grieving him, and the dancing felt like that too.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
and
Yeah, the
it's just
celebration.
so nice to hear you talking about like how much agency actually is available in this case around like meaning making. That's so powerful.
Yeah. And I reckon that it was particular to me with now both of my parents having died, that the the realization from that is I'm on my own, you know? I can't defer my decisions to a bigger person like a carer anymore. I was being prepared for that in some ways by my father getting sick and dying. But it became very clear to me, I think, in those days that all the agency for everything is on me. It's like that Bob Dylan song, I guess it must be up to me. And that's what I felt, that it was all up to me. The agency of, okay, I'm the adult, you know? My parents are gone. I am the adult. There's no parent for me to relate to as a dependent child anymore. I have to do these things. I have to decide what my life means to me. I have to decide what I want out of life. Made all the more poignant because I hadn't been able to decide that by caring for them. So they both are dead, and it's like, okay, now it's all on me. And so I just thank you for saying the word agency because I think this is a specific thing about both parents dying is that you you realize your agency. At least I have, I feel like this ability to live life completely on your terms and not refer to anyone else, their perceptions or their desires for you. Because it's especially easy to do with parents. And it can make you confused because you don't know if you're living their life or your life.
Yeah, let's talk about the cleaning.
Hmm. So I had another doula friend in Canada, and she had known for a while what was happening with my dad and I, and you and I knew that I wanted to do some oil anointing with him. I wanted to bring oils into it. I wanted to touch his body. I wanted to be really present with him. And where my friend came in was she sent kind of a script of what we could, yeah, a script, um, but this introduction to, okay, what you could really do with anointing is specific energy centers on the body with specific phrases. I remember this one. We honor Phil's brow for being the birthplace of his thoughts with the oil, and you rub that area. I remember I did that, and I said that phrase, and then I said, and there were a lot of thoughts. So in that you can hear, okay, there were original statements that were kind of put there, but then from that emerged more spontaneous speech because it kind of just like the chakras that they corresponded to different aspects of a person's life, and so you got kind of this full picture. Before that, you and I stripped him and washed him. and cleaned him. And that was very intimate to me. I had just learned how to give a bed bath from one of the hospice workers. And so we stripped him and we washed him off. Eventually, we put him in new, clean clothes. That came later. And that was very, I, I look back at that time. I think out of everything, that was the moment that really cemented to me that you you were like in this with me. That you were also fully here for whatever was arising in a way that you just can't come back from, you know? And we've talked about that. Like since then, you feel like I have a depth and comfort of friendship with you that you just go through something like that and you just can't come back from it. And there were many moments where I could probably point to, but I think the biggest one was that moment that you just like dove in with me and we stripped him and cleaned his body together and I felt like wow, like that I had like a partner doing this with me when I had felt so isolated and alone for years in this that at this really critical moment for me that you had come in and helped me so much already but then had really given yourself over to this was for me this I think kind of tipping point is how I felt about what you and I were doing there. I went, oh my God, she's in it, you know? She's here for all of it. And then I took you had gotten an orange scented oil. I still have that. It's on my nightstand. I still have that oil. I take it out and smell it every once in a while. Brings me right back.
I bet. Oh my God. That's,
Yeah,
yeah. I guess you're gonna probably always
yeah,
have that association with orange smell now.
yeah, I think so. And so I took it and I started the process with the energy centers. Yeah, exactly like that. Was taking the oils. I don't even know if you were doing that, but it was exactly like that. Was taking it and just like, I think the top of his head and his brows and his mouth, his nose for being, I think the portal for his breath to enter his body, something like that, and his lips for the kind words he had spoken and the encouraging words, his shoulders for carrying so much in his life, something like that. And I just worked my way down. And you were there with me. And that was, I think, of everything, the point where it really felt like a funeral because I was just speaking about him now to someone else that was there. That felt the most like a funeral. It was almost his eulogy, you could say. Um, what was different, though, is that I got further down his body. That I felt a conflict between what I was expecting and wanting myself to say and what I was actually feeling. And I think this was the key thing about why a script and a eulogy and an audience and can be actually bad because I actually started to get really angry at him. I had been angry at him for a very long time and I had repressed it, not very successfully, but to care for him because I just knew from our relationship it was just not something I could really talk with him about. I just didn't. I felt that it would really hurt him, and I didn't want to do that. But at that point, I was getting to the point of his legs, and the statement was with that, like, we honor Phil's legs for carrying him through the challenges of his life. And I had some qualms with that. I had my own disagreement with that statement. And so I actually, I think I said something like, I can't do this. And instead, what I wanted to do was be really angry and say, okay, well, That's all right. I think eventually you left so I could just say what was on my mind, but you stayed for some of it. I just started to let it rip. And I let myself say to him what I've always wanted to say to him for a long time. I had a lot of anger with him over the years, and I finally let it rip. And that's the difference, I think, between a eulogy in front of people and this was that in the eulogy, you're expected to say, oh, he was an angel. Oh, he was so beautiful. Oh, he could do no wrong. Oh, I'm gonna miss him so much. And you only talk about these beautiful qualities that they had, but it's not this full picture of them. And by that same token, since it's not the full picture of them, you might not get the full experience of your emotions in your relationship to this person because you're only expected to talk about the, I mean, I'll sum it all up in the phrase, don't speak ill of the dead, which was partly where I struggled with my mother for so long. Was I had this relationship to her that had a lot of emotions that weren't just happy. And I couldn't talk about it with people because it's like, don't speak ill of the dead. It's kind of not an easy conversation starter to sit next to someone and go, so I really am mad at my dead mom. It's not like you can't do that. But what I appreciated about you is that you were very flexible with it. You just went, okay, like let it rip. And the same as my doula friend who had sent the script was like, yeah, if you're angry, be angry. Like let whatever's there there. That is the point. It's not to feel lovey-dovey and sweet and happy. It's so that you do feel whatever's there. And I just I just remember you came in and I was sitting at the table and you said something to me like how you doing and I just like I started like shouting at him. Do you remember
Uh-huh.
that? And you were just what I like to say, you were just fine with it, you were welcoming for that. I just started shouting at him. I was very angry. And then I did the ritual eventually one more time. I felt like I had come to an understanding of my anger and that I did eventually complete it to my satisfaction. And then that night you had left. I went for a walk. I came back and I was with them again. And I broke down and cried. But I wasn't crying for his death this time. I was crying for our life together and how difficult it had been. And because I think to this day, because I let myself feel that anger towards him, I reached the point where I realized um, that he and I both suffered so much in that society, in that world, just surviving. And that it couldn't have been how I wanted it to be between us, where it was easy breezy and we weren't struggling to make money, we weren't struggling to survive, we weren't stressed all the time. I realized that finally that was impossible. And I cried and I cried. I think I wailed then too. You weren't there, but I felt like that night I went mad. Like I went a bit crazy with grief over his life this time, over the fact of what we went through together. So I think that because I let myself be angry, I then could get to my grief over the fact that I was angry that things were hard. I was rightfully angry that things were hard. I was angry at a lot that he um, dropped the ball on. But then I reached the grief stage of going, well, of course, like we suffered a lot, both of us. We suffered so much together. And to me, that was really important that I had that with him still around because I kept speaking to him through the anger and also through the grief. I wasn't just crying alone in my room. This was still a very relational thing that was happening that could not have been done while he was alive, while he was breathing. I still think he was there up to that point and receiving this in a way that he couldn't have been while he was alive. And
Mind if I jump in real quick?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I can't think of anything else that day.
Yeah, to me it felt not just like he was there, but also I get this sense around death that there's something where the whole lineage energy is there. Again,
Yeah.
this is my meaning making and how I experience things and stuff, and I'm not gonna like
Yeah.
push this view on anybody, but a way I tend to experience it and was experiencing it that day because it's like as the death is happening, things in the lineage energy need to be rearranging anyway, right? Like there's this huge
Yeah.
transition happening in it. And so my sense was like you were like incredibly engaged with this whole family energy that was very extra present right then in that moment anyway. And I
Yeah.
also just want to say that, like, I'm really feeling something strongly as you're talking about it, which is that there were two moments in particular over that week where I noticed you do something that was like incredibly shamanic in terms of um, the way that energy was moving. Like, one
Mm.
thing we didn't mention on Saturday, the day that he was dying, was like, well, you did mention reading that Walt Whitman poem to him. I had noticed that like the energy in the room felt a little bit stuck. And you went and sat next to him and you didn't just put your hand on his chest and his heart, you actually like you did this kind of like really beautiful, soft but not like soft but strong, kind of like rubbing his heart. And then you recited that Walt Whitman passage that you referenced before, like from memory as you were doing that. And I was
Mm.
sitting in a different part of the room, and the entire energy in the room changed from my perspective. Like things had been kind of stuck, and yeah, the whole active dying period was kind of this marathon. Like you mentioned him being a marathon rower at the beginning, and it was like
Yeah.
this mar this marathon that he was
Yeah.
doing so fast but gracefully. And I think part of that was like
Yeah.
things started to get stopped up, and then you came in and did this like really shamanic, just through your like presence and attunement, and I think touching his heart, like everything started moving again. And I think this anger piece that you're bringing up, I'm so glad that you're talking about it. That was the other time that week that, like, I think your attunement to what you were actually genuinely, honestly feeling and like what was happening in this situation around you and your willingness, again, that like strength of opening yourself up to like what is actually here, even if it's fucking
Yeah.
inconvenient. Like, wow,
Yeah.
I'm actually really angry with my dad right now, and it feels like he's here and is receptive to
Yeah.
like, let's do this. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it was very intense, and I think it changed and opened things up in this like whole way that most people would not go anywhere near.
Yeah. No, most people are content with, oh, they're gone. Well, better get on with my life. And I'll save this until the end, but I feel like since then the dreams that I've had have given me this feeling of resolution when it comes to him. And the relationship I had with him while he was alive. I've had a number of dreams, even just one this last week, that have felt to me like the most significant and profound dreams of my life. And they related to both of my parents. And so I feel like what we call shamanic is moving energy, moving the subconscious fluid waters and like diverting channels in a way that things flowing. And I feel like for me, it's not scientific, but I want to say the evidence that that was flowing comes in the dreams that have been receiving since then, and the dream and the feeling that I'm getting from those. We can go to those at the end because I feel like that's a nice bow to tie to this whole story. But thank you for noticing that because I had forgotten about the chest rubbing, and I don't know. It just came natural to me, like that kind of stuff. It wasn't kind of a conscious thought. It's kind of like sometimes here I just want to walk through the room and burn sage, you know, or I just want to offer someone chocolate. I don't know why. It's just impulse, but maybe that's like giving sweetness to them or something. I don't know. Um, so it's interesting. Yeah. It felt to me the whole thing was very shamanic, that it was Death is this massive release of the person from the body, but it's a release for everyone around that chooses to fully participate in it too. That's what I think. Yeah.
One other thing I would say about the cleaning that I mentioned earlier, this is my first time doing that. I had heard from a number of people how powerful of a ritual that can be. And I will say that the whole ritual felt really beautiful, not just beautiful, but like natural to me. Like, oh, it makes a lot of sense to do this. But what really like brought that home for me was when you picked out some like really fresh, clean, nice clothes for him, and we
Oh, right.
after after we cleaned him, we dressed him in this like really nice kind of turquoise blue green polo and like
Yeah.
nice fresh pair of jeans and like a cool hat. And
Yeah.
the way his arms had kind of settled in rigor mortis across his
Yeah.
chest, we like put some flowers under his arms, and
Yeah.
he looked he looked so beautiful. He
He
looked
did.
so fresh and clean for one thing, and that was when it really hit me at a body level. Like, of course we should do this. Like, it felt
Yeah.
because things were messy towards the end with bodily fluids and things, and like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
felt like such an act of care and respect to
Yeah.
send him off really fresh and clean and handsome and dapper like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Dignity. That's the word that's floating in my mind. Like hearing you talk about this is dignity. I think he suffered with not feeling that as his body was failing him. So I felt that it was an act of restoration to his dignity that he felt he might have lost by putting him in that polo. And the polo, he embroidered encourage on it. And that was from one of his favorite Bible verses, which he summed up as how important it was to encourage other people in every aspect, just to be an encouraging force, for people in their life. That was, I think, the wisdom he had gleaned in the last 5 or 6 years of his life from his biblical scholarship and just the way he started to really feel he wanted to move in the world after the death of my mother. He felt it was so important to encourage people. And so for me, it was to dress him and to restore him to his dignity, but to choose that shirt felt very significant because then it is, remembering someone at their best, which is another topic. We do need to make peace with these memories of difficulty, but we also want to remember them at their best. I think that's the resolution that I eventually wanted to have with him and do have, I think, is remembering someone at their best and not their worst. And so I think dressing him in this was restoring him to that dignity, not just remembering him at his best physically, where he didn't have these messy problems, but emotionally too, where it was all about this message of encouragement to other people. We put him in his favorite Stetson hat. We put socks on and put the flowers around, and we took some pictures. And it's just the same. I remember walking away from the anointing and feeling like, why don't we do this to people while they're alive? Why don't we take oils and anoint them? Why don't we dress them? Why don't we worship them? Like, why does this have to wait until they're dead? Why don't we do that while they're alive? And we can have this reciprocal reception from them of our love and worship and adoration of them, where they can feel it and we can see them feeling it and we can take pleasure in them feeling our love for them, and this anointing. So it didn't just help me with him in his death, but I think it really helped me relate to people afterwards. It's like, okay, like, why do we have to wait till someone dies to love them? Why do we have to wait to express our love for them? What is the point of that? Like, so many people, once someone has died, think of all the things they wish they could have said. And I said everything that I felt that my dad could receive while he was breathing. And then I said everything I needed to say to him until he was picked up. And I feel for me, again, 6 months out, who knows? But I feel that it's been a very clean way for me to do it. And not just clean, but profound and beautiful. And I don't remember your question. I don't remember your statement. I've gone off on a little. Huh? I
Oh my
don't
God,
remember
me
where I was
neither.
coming
Me
from.
neither. When you started talking about how we should be worshiping each other in life, yeah, that just took me to, I don't know, I really lit up something somewhere in me.
Yeah.
I don't remember the question either. Was there anything else from Sunday that really stands out in your memory?
Um, I felt so normal. We've already talked about that, but it just felt like he was a part of the everyday functioning. You know, we were having meals around him. I was eating around him. I was hanging out around him and talking to him. I like that it felt so normal because normally it's just something that's so not normal. We view it with horror or kind of this kind of curiosity, but like how you're curious about when you're like little and you're curious about sex, but it's like because it's taboo and not because it's normal, because of the societal programming to see it as a taboo topic. And so I felt actually for the taboo mystique to be stripped from it, and there's still a mystique around it, but the taboo aspect for it to just be completely normal um, was very soothing for my body. It was very soothing for my system to just have him there, dead, and still have him in my life and get used to that fact. That was
Yeah,
Sunday, and I can go into Monday a little more about that, but I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
I would just say, hearing you say that, like, I think it's impossible to be this intimate with death and not have it make you think about your own death, and like to
Yeah,
spend time with the body that's not breathing for multiple days. It reminds you really viscerally that I'm going to stop breathing at some point and I'm going to die, and
yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
when, and I have some amount of control over that, and I also don't have control. And
yeah,
I hope that as I'm going, that you know, people will really take some time and care and direct that towards me and my body. And
yeah,
who knows? And also, I loved, like I said, I wasn't staying there. I was staying somewhere else. So I would leave at night, come in the morning, and I loved that he was there for 2 nights. And I got to say goodbye to him when I left and say hello to him when I came in. There was
yeah,
something about, and like we were saying about Saturday night and slowing things down, it felt like we were also doing that on this like wider scale of like not rushing the body out and just like being in that apartment with the body. It was like a different place. It was just a
mm,
different thing. It was this very liminal zone. And
yeah,
you were actually sleeping there too. I wasn't. But
yeah,
that was just a really nice, again, just letting this whole thing be gradual and slow and spacious. And so like
yeah,
whatever process his body was in, his body and spirit, like I don't claim to know what is going on there and the timing of those things, but it felt so good to just give it all some space and like have the space personally too to be like, oh yeah, right, because body's not breathing, and eventually my body will stop breathing, and that's normal
yeah,
too. And he's here when I leave, and he's here when I come back, and then at some point they'll come and take his body, like just the slowness of it all.
yeah. And on that point of like, okay, his body's not breathing, mine won't breathe eventually. Like the word I'm thinking of is urgency, but it's not a stress. It's not a pressure, but it's an urgency, like a profound thing. I walk through the city just a few weeks ago, and I look around at all these people, and I think we are all going to die. All of these people will have a last day. Today is one less day in my life than before. It was always going to be that way at night, one less day. In the morning, you can say, oh, I've got one more day because you wake up and you're not dead. But at night, you go to bed, one less day. And it's like that with all of our relationships too. One less day. Whether they stay with us until we die or they leave us, that fact remains. The nature of how they leave might be the same, might be different, but one less day remains true. The fact of death remains true no matter what circumstance we are in. For me, what I feel like since then, it's still fresh, but what I feel like since then is that it makes all of my interactions with everyone so important because we are always transmitting something to other people. And what my dad gave to me was that encourage word. And I feel like the idea of encouraging, the idea of what kind of person, what kind of transmission do I want to put out there in the world? How do I want to be with people, knowing the fact that we all have one last day? It's not a pressure. It makes everything more alive and precious because we know we have limited time with each other. It like adds this vitality to everything. It adds this like not this stress, but this aliveness, this almost this excitement to that fact that we it just doesn't last. And it's like we've got to not necessarily fill our day all the time with activity forever and ever, but we've got to be serious about what we do with our lives. And I don't mean every hour we've got to do that. I don't think I do, at least. It's just as far as like life path, who we choose to be with, how we choose to show up in the world. When we don't let ourselves be exposed to death, when we keep it at bay, these questions don't invade our mind because we keep them out. We keep the fact of our limited time as this body, we keep it out of our conscious awareness. And if we bring it in, it is a bit scary because it's so taboo. But then it's like, okay, how am I going to live my life knowing this is true? How am I going to be with people, even people I might not ever see again, even people that have wronged me, even relationships that are temporary and not, they're all temporary, but some more temporary than others based off of their duration in time. How am I going to do that? And that's one beautiful thing that has emerged from this in me is this feeling around all of that, I think. Um, and so to have a home funeral, to have this exposure to the body, it allows you to think about all of that. But otherwise, it's like this very compartmentalized event. And it might, if you don't let it in, you might not have that response. I'm not saying everyone will have the same response, but I think more or less we could all benefit from thinking about our death.
Yeah, I love that. Take your life seriously. It matters. And that means the individual days matter. A life is made up of days.
Yeah. Yeah. So Monday.
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 What happened on Monday, Dylan?
What happened on Monday, Jane? I woke up and I did a yoga practice next to him. I was in Savasana, and which is called corpse pose, and I thought he was doing a much better job than I was. Even at the time, I looked over it and I thought, "Wow, you got me beat." An interesting kind of thing to try out, though, is because often I hear that when I'm in Savasana, like die, like die to the world or die to knowledge. What does that really mean to let go so much it is as if you were dead? So that was kind of interesting anyway. And I decided I wanted to keep him longer again. So I called them and they were fine with that. I rescheduled from I think 11 a.m. to 3. I think I don't remember much besides the fact that right before he got picked up, I wrote one more poem to him and I read it out to him with you. And pretty much when I was done, the hearse came to pick him up. Um, One thing I did throughout my time with him once I got the oil was it would be how I would interact with him. Even after I did the anointing, I would take the oil and just kind of just keep touching him, you know? I just felt there is a taboo around death and a taboo around touch with a dead body. And so for me, that helped me normalize it because how often do we not feel like we feel someone until we touch them? And so I think there was something there also in touching his body and feeling the coldness and the stiffness set in. And one significant thing I mentioned a few times, but I realized on this day was that Sunday, he looked like he was just asleep. But Monday, he looked like he was dead. It looked like he wasn't there anymore. And I don't know how to describe it other than some subtle sensing in the way his body was arranged and something in his face and just some different energy or absence of energy. I don't know. But it felt different the next day. It felt like he was gone. It felt less, and especially once he was cremated, I saw him a few days later for the cremation. It felt like a body and not my dad. That's as best as I can put it in language. I don't remember if anything else happened before the hearse. Do you?
Yeah, I will just say what you're saying about him really looking dead. Like we were also very on top of it with ice packs and dry ice and stuff. Like and
Yeah.
keeping
Yeah.
I don't remember if we turned on the air conditioning or opened the windows because it was cold at night, but like
I
we
think,
were like really monitoring the temperature in there and then also had ice packs and stuff. And so like
yeah.
it with all of that preservation, there was still like a really noticeable difference in his
Right.
appearance.
Right. Yeah. January.
I love that you're bringing in the haptic element too. I think like if you think
Yeah.
about how meaningful touch is to us throughout our lives and the way we're touched and held as babies and how that over the course of our lives there's the way that touch is so meaningful to us and so connected with love and connection and everything like it
Mm,
seems like oh yeah like of course that should be part of the like saying goodbye and grieving and like ritualizing after death and stuff but I do think you're right that a lot of people maybe just because it's foreign have like a lot of ick around that or have some kind of assumption that like as soon as somebody dies their body becomes unsafe to touch or like
yeah. Like,
contaminant or
and
something yeah which is not the case and
yeah.
it's I remember that you did keep going back to like the oil and like little ways of anointing and stuff and it's um I love hearing about that like really haptic quality of grief and saying goodbye that you got.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
remember that much else about like the lead up on Monday to the guys coming. I remember the like whole process of them being there being like very interesting.
Yeah. They were very good. Um, Sometimes professional has a negative connotation, but here they were very professional in the best term, best
Yeah.
possible use of it. They were quite gentle with him and very calm, I would say. And they had to, they were on a very narrow stairwell. He was on the second floor, and they had to be um, quite not specific, but quite delicate with the turn and with getting him down the stairs. And they did very well. I felt at that point I was ready for it to happen. They they took the hat with him, his hat with him. They loaded him in and they drove him off. And I remember as soon as that car turned the corner, I felt this just like intense pain in my chest, like something was getting torn out of me. I felt like it was getting torn out of me, that I was being separated from his body. and that was very painful for me. I kind of almost went into a bit of shock for a while there after it happened, I think. Almost like a come down from that, all that time with him.
Right, because that 42 hours really felt much longer than that. And so that was already a big transition into him being dead, but home with you. And then now was like this whole next phase of transition. And it was really,
Yeah.
really big. And one thing that there was obviously one guy was much more experienced than the other guy because he was giving him a lot of direction. And the guy with all
Oh,
of the
yeah.
experience, I noticed he came in and saw your dad and he said to us, "You guys did a really good job." And then he said that again later, and I thought that was sweet. It felt like he noticed and appreciated like all of the care that we had brought to that situation.
You're right. That's a good point.
And then there's something about watching them go down the stairs because it was a tricky stairwell. It almost felt like, again, this is
Yeah.
part of the fullness. It almost felt like we were in a movie where, like,
Yeah.
if they drop him, like this is about to be like an awful, like a shitty low budget comedy or
Yeah.
something. You know what I mean? Like, um, so
Like
you and
someone
I
makes
were
some
kind of
kind of
like
noise.
standing at the top of the steps,
You're
like
right.
a
You're right.
whole. I think we might have
Yeah.
been holding hands or something, just like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
don't drop him. Like you guys know what you're doing, right? Like that guy's
Come
kind of
on.
new. You guys got it, right?
We're like, come on, come on.
They did not drop him. They got him
Yeah.
down the stairs, thank God, and
Yeah.
into the van safely.
Yeah. But that
Uh,
was like a pregnant moment, eh? We were both very tense from it.
oh my God.
We were like,
And
we're
then
so close, almost there.
and then we went back into an empty apartment and
Yeah.
it was a whole new chapter of the process.
Yeah. 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 I had to clear it out. And I tried by the end of the month. It was the 20th at that point, but I couldn't do it. I had to ask for some more time. But I first was a cremation, and that actually, oh, it's interesting because I was calling crematoriums that night, I Sunday night, and I think this is worth mentioning because right before I broke down around him and cried and had that massive grief episode, I was calling crematoriums, and it was so businesslike. And this was professional in the bad way of the term, where I called about 10 crematoriums, and most of the operators, it was exactly like I was just calling an office, you know? And I talked to a few different funeral directors, and it felt like I was just getting information, um, that I didn't feel a quality of care or sensitivity to what had just happened. And the people that were saying sorry for your loss were saying it kind of like you would if you just answered the phone for anything, like a script. I remember I talked to one woman who um, was very caring and kind and understanding to me. And I even called her back and asked if she could give us a bit of a discount on the cremation, give me a bit of a discount. And she agreed yes. And I just about broke down. And it was that point that I think it just hit me how cold the world my dad and I had been living in. Um, I got this one moment of kindness that was even hard to find in a crematorium, like a funeral home. Like most of it was the same exact shit that was frustrating me about the society I was in. It was just scripted conversation, robots talking to one another. And I got this moment of kindness, and something in me just really broke. And then I went to my father and wept and went mad, like I was saying, with grief, because I realized that it was the world we were living in that was so difficult for us. It was so many things that we couldn't control, but one of them was that society. One of them was that world. One of them was the coldness of the world, the difficulty of survival. And I think that's worth mentioning because it might be the case sometimes with funeral homes that you get more sensitivity and care, but it also might be the exact same because I found both sides. And I actually found more that it was just another business. And sorry for your loss was the slogan, the statement, the script that you said, but it wasn't actually meant. And the one that it was meant by, I went with her. I went with that place because I could tell she actually cared about me, even if it was over the phone. Um, they ended up being in a different town, quite far to drive. But because of that, I felt more inclined to go with them. So, yeah, I add that because for people that are not used to what to do after a death, it's the exact, it's business. There's a lot of it that's still just business. And
I think it's a nice reason to for people to consider doing part of the death care themselves too, is to
yeah, exactly.
like the personal touch is going to be very natural to you because this is not something you do as a job day in day out. It's like you're um like for those people, I can see it probably is hard to maintain that perspective of the gravity of any given person's loss because this is
Right.
their day in day out world.
It's just a Tuesday to them.
Yeah, like every death doula that I know, after they sit with a death, they take a break. Like they do not
Yeah.
run off to the next death. Surgeons don't. Surgeons go back to work the next day and might, you know what I mean? Like they're
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's another reason, another point about like why it's nice to consider bringing some of that home.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Because you're more as likely to encounter people that still respect the gravity of the situation and haven't become um, normalized to it. And there is an aspect normalization that we want, but there's another aspect where the profundity of it becomes removed.
Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, the cremation. Anything, anything else you wanted to touch on from Monday, or the cremation was the week after, but I think that's worth saying. I'll talk
Okay.
about what happened after you left in the cremation. The cremation, what happened after you left was that his cats were still with me, but I was alone. He was gone. I was alone. My parents were both dead, and it was time for me to clean up my father's life, and so that captured my attention. I didn't really give much thought to what I was going to do afterwards, but I had to move him out. I had to go through his things again, which I had been doing for years at that point, since 2020. Get rid of more things, keep more things, decide what to throw, what to store, boxes to put in. And I was talking about this with a friend, and I think one thing I will think about before my death is to get rid of what I don't, to get rid of stuff. Because the death is difficult enough on a family, but then if you have to pick up the pieces afterwards, that can be. I was lucky because I had support and resources, but if I hadn't had those resources, I would have been really fucked. I would have had no money to take time off to move him out, and I was on my own. I had friends that came and helped for big items. They helped for a day or two, and that was wonderful. But besides that, I was on my own. And if any, as far as like logistics, I think if I were, if I had really many things and I were dying, what I would be concerned about is who am I leaving with what, and am I, and everything else have I gotten rid of if I knew my death was imminent. I wouldn't, if I knew, if I had an illness and I knew I was going to die, I would clean up as much of my life as I could. The phrase, get your affairs in order, to make it as easy as possible for the people I'm leaving behind, if that's children or a partner or just my friends. And so it took me a long time to move him out. And it was a new journey where it was like, okay, I had been in this caretaker role for years. I had my father as my best friend and my reference point for years, the person I saw the most, and suddenly he was gone. that was very disorientating. And I was very lucky to have friends that I could still call and talk to, um, even though I spent a lot of my time on my own. And the cremation was interesting to me. I bring this up because we were talking about ancestral lines. And at the cremation, I was all alone. Even the funeral director had somehow misscheduled, and they're supposed to show up, and they weren't even there. So I was like all alone with the crematorium guys. I was sitting in this room with plastic chairs and all sitting there completely alone. And I did not feel alone. I felt that my entire ancestral lineage was right there with me. I felt that all of those chairs were full. I wrote a poem on it. I felt all of those chairs were full. I felt my parents and my grandparents were crowded around me, and I felt cared for. I remember seeing my grandfather's face. I'd never seen him in real life, but he told me he was proud of me, you know? And I saw my dad's body one more time, and I teared up a little bit. I did, but for the most part, it didn't look like him anymore. It didn't feel like him to me. It was
How
just
long
his
was
best.
it? How many days after he died?
I think it was the following Monday or Tuesday, so at least a week. At least at least 9 days, maybe 10 or 11. Yeah, yeah. And I presided over the cremation. I pressed the button to slide him in, and I stood there for about an hour or two and talked to the managers there, and um, it was nice to talk to them, and I feel like it was nice for them to talk to me because they weren't used to people being so comfortable with it. And one of the guys there mentioned to me that it was important to remember them how they would want to be remembered, remember them at their best.
Was that the
But
person who advised you not to take photos?
yeah, yeah. He said, don't. There was a little porthole where you could look in, and he said, don't do that. People do that, and they tell me years later how much they regret it.
Looking in or taking pictures?
Taking pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah, I looked in, but I didn't take any pictures. There was, and it felt to me, I didn't feel much emotional weight with it besides my ancestors. I felt like I was presiding over a duty. I felt that I had a job to do, and I stayed and I watched until I was pretty satisfied that that it was done, and then I left. And the cremation actually takes 3 or 4 hours, but I didn't stay that long. I felt quite satisfied at that point that I had done everything I kind of needed to do as his heir.
It's nice that you had the felt sense for that
Yeah,
when that was, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I felt that it was done. My kind of that my job to him was done. Yeah, and it marked off all of that. The sense of not actually feeling alone, feeling my ancestral energy around me, feeling them occupying all those chairs, known and unknown people. And that is, I think, probably the natural stopping point for this, the home funeral from the days before to the cremation. I His ashes are with my mother's ashes in California. I plan to spread them together at some point in California over some California poppies. Yeah, but I think that marks the end of it.
Yeah, if you just feel back into everything that we've talked about and that time period, is there anything else that feels like we missed or just wants to come back up in some way?
I've had a number of dreams since then, and the only thing I'll say is that the dreams have shown me to myself that I've done the right thing, that all of that was the right thing for me to do. and that my parents are at peace now, and happy even. And so I felt from the dreams I've had afterwards, for me, my dreams are kind of like a temperature check on what's going on in my life. And as far as it relates to my parents, I did everything that I needed to do, wanted to do, and could have done with them.
It's really sweet to hear you say that. I feel like your strength at full volume as you say that. It's I hope you're proud of that. It's amazing that you have done everything that you've done for your parents, especially your dad, and that you have such a clear, integrated sense of having done what you needed and wanted to do. I think that's a lot of people don't feel that way in relationship with family. I hope you're very proud of that, and I think you should be.
Thank you, Jane.
Hmm. Okay. Any last words before we wrap up?
Well, yeah, you're a very special person, Jane. You're a very special person. Don't know if it's the 12th house stellium you've got or what. But you just have this way of being spacious for all of the taboo normally considered to be allowed. And I think that suits you so well for doula work. If anyone is listening that is will require a doula at some point, and we all will, I think Jane is so suited to that because she can take on any number of roles. This is my marketing campaign for Jane. But really sincerely, thank you for doing this for me, for being a presence for me at the end of a very isolating time of my life. Because what you brought to the table helped me so much to see it through to the end. And I just think that kind of thing, it can't be done completely alone, even though more or less I did it. I had you. And that helped me so much. It really did. And I think that to me is like as good an advertisement as any for a doula, to actually have a doula and see what it's like to have someone that can take on any role that's necessary and be there and be this emotional field where you can walk through. Um, it's a role that's not really kind of well known. You don't really understand what it is until you have it. I remember my dad wasn't sure what it was that you did. And I don't think we kind of knew what it was that you were going to do until you did it.
Yeah.
But I just say that, like, as far as suitable personality, like disposition, view on the whole process, that I could not think of having a better doula. That for me, it went as well as it possibly could have. It was a beautiful, mysterious, like creative, ecstatic kind of experience. And you helped me so much with that. So, with all that I have to offer, thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Like I've probably said like five things already that are like, this was my favorite part. Like the thing that I think is really my favorite part of like one of the peak experiences of my life was like you said earlier, like you and I have something now between us that is like we have been through this like most beautiful, precious experience together, and now we'll always have that. Like I think we'll be in each other's lives for a long time, and we will always be bonded by this like the profundity of this. And it's so sweet to have this with you. You and I have always had a nice friendship, but it's like it's just a different thing now. It's almost like we're family now. Like it's
Yeah.
and to some extent I feel that with your dad now too, with Phil. It's like I just the fact that he like let me into that space and welcomed me even not really knowing me, it
Mm.
is like overwhelmingly moving that because it's so vulnerable, it's so
Yep.
intimate. Everything that
Yep.
we talked about from that week, like the everything was so intimate. It was all so naked and raw and real, and like that's a really big deal to let people into that space with you. And so I feel like this so bonded to Phil that I got to be a part of his departure like that.
My dad is
And I,
smiling right now. He's happy that you were there with me. He couldn't have been happier.
mm, it's yeah, it's so sweet to be connected with both of you in this way. So thank you for saying all of those sweet things and bringing me in and letting me like I learned so much. There were so many firsts for me and that too. Like the the beauty of not just getting to be in the magnitude of that experience with a dear friend and his dad, but also be like it was so educational for me as a doula and just so meaning rich. Like I still can't believe how much happened in that week. it's,
I
it's
don't think
really
I ever will.
outside of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Outside of time and space in its own zone. Like, I think a good word is portal. You're good at the portals. You know, yeah.
Yeah, something really wakes up in me when a death is imminent and I am called towards it. So thank you also for giving me an opportunity to show up to something where I could feel really in the right place at the right time and feel really aligned with my dharma. You know, this feels like getting to offer something in the world that I feel I really have in me for whatever reason. For whatever reason, it's the right thing for me. So thank you for letting me
Yeah.
do that so fully.
Well, of course. I mean, I can see very well. I can see very clearly it's the right thing for you too.
Thanks. A thing like coming through very strongly for me now too, as like a way of wrapping it up, is feeling some of your dad and lineage energy around. Like I am just feeling so much gratitude from them to you for everything that you've done. I think your caretaking days and then all the way through. Like you just kept seeing things through all the way, even when it fucking sucked and you had nothing left and you had to just keep going. Like you did that with the
Yeah.
caretaking, you did that with the death. I mean, before I left, you kind of like right when his body was taken away, you kind of like went to a different realm and we
Yeah.
sat in that together for a little bit. And I think you were
Yeah.
like, you were kind of past empty at that point, but you just had to keep showing up. And then you had this whole task ahead of you on your
Yeah.
own, pretty much of like clearing out the apartment and getting things moving. And then you
Yeah.
like figured out a way to get to New Zealand where you could like really get some nourishment and stuff. It's like you kind of just had to keep going and seeing things through day after day, like for years, really. And so I feel like on behalf of your lineage, just like an unbelievable amount of gratitude here.
I feel that too. Thank you. I was past empty. I was so far empty, it was like reverse full. Ah, they went all the way back around somehow. Not actually, just the dial, like the
Right,
little
right, right, right. Yeah.
clock malfunction.
The dial's like, what's going on? What's going on? He's not stopping.
Yeah,
What if I speed up? Will he stop?
yeah, yeah. How like in the movies or an animated show, a car like it's like farting and croaking and coughing as it pulls up to the finish line, and then everything falls off, and the wheels like fall to the side, and it catches on fire. Felt like me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Jane. It was such a pleasure to see you again.
I love you, Dylan.
I love you too, Jane.